Hello and welcome to the last CTO Craft Bytes before Christmas, your last one of the year. And we're going to talk about how to avoid failure with an outsourcing agency. We're going to be discussing common mistakes that agencies and companies can make when running staff augmentation or projects, and how to identify and correct issues when they occur. So if this is your first time joining us at CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a bit more about who we are at CTO Craft and what we do. So CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community members are over 5,000, and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events like this one. And a huge thanks to our headline partner AWS for making these Byte events possible. So hello, I'm Zoe. I'm a director at a company called Software, an outsourcing agency. So I have some experience in this area. And at Software, I help with general oversight and also getting involved in events and with communities like this one. And I also host our podcast, Software Tech Talk. So please feel free to take a listen to that if you're interested. And joining me is Glyn Roberts, who is the CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt. So, Glyn, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me on, and it's an honour to be on the last CTO Craft of the year. So I'm Glyn Roberts. I've worked in multiple different companies over my time, starting off in agency as a developer, moving into a different agency as a senior developer. About 3 years ago, I was working in Portugal in an agency over there as well, so I've seen it differently in the UK versus in elsewhere inside Europe. And at the moment now, yes, I'm CTO of Digital Solutions at iTechArt, where we have developers based in Belarus, Poland, Ukraine, and we're also extending out into other areas as well. So hopefully I can provide some wise words of wisdom, show you, give you a few stories of things that I've seen where mistakes have happened and how to try and protect yourself and make sure you can move forward.
So outsourcing with the extra challenges there of different countries and cultures, and I'm sure that will come up because that's a super interesting part of the whole adventure of using agencies. So let's kick off and talk about how to avoid failure. And let's start with why is there a stigma? I think, agency, that using an agency has got a bad name in some ways. And why is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Throughout my history, I've definitely come across some really bad agencies that have given everyone a bad name, a bit like the recruitment industry. There's a load of bad recruiters out there just spamming people, and therefore the whole industry has a bad name. But there are really good recruiters, and it's the same with outsourcing for agencies as well. There's some really good outsourcing agencies out there as well. It's just important to know what to look for. Essentially a prime example of this is 16 years ago when I started working, one of the clients I was working with decided to use another outsourcing agency based in India. They ended up just hiding a load of content in, the same color as the background text to try and improve their SEO. They get banned off Google. And then obviously they come back to us crying, saying, can you fix it? Can you get us back on Google? That's like just one prime example of a bad agency doing something that's not effectively right.
That's extreme though. That's
absolutely.
That's not just I'm used to some agencies are just a bit incompetent, but that is wow.
Yeah,
that
I haven't seen anything that bad for a while.
Yeah.
But this was about 15, 16 years ago when I first saw that case. But I think especially at the beginning of the century, there were a lot of agencies in a lot of other countries starting to offer their expertise where it wasn't really expertise. They just found some tricks to try and get around, and people were abusing that situation, and obviously it comes back to bite them. I think over, in the current age, it's not as bad as that. I'll be surprised if anyone has any stories of that type of extreme coming about, but these things do happen in certain very small cases. So but I think the industry's got a lot better reputations there. You have clutchful reviews of companies out there now, so people can do their homework, see other people's reviews of organizations before deciding which agency they want to go with. So therefore it's not just a shot in the dark of which company to actually use anymore.
Yeah, you do understand though, if you had an experience like that, how burned you would feel, right? And how once the trust goes, it's very difficult to recover from that. And
absolutely, never using agencies again could be easily said in that situation. And in the modern world, it's more of a case of even the good agencies can sometimes make mistakes. There can be issues with the way that the client and yourselves communicate where things are misunderstood and mistakes happen, and the checks and supports haven't been put in place, so therefore things can fall down. So even with good agencies, mistakes happen, which can also seem quite bad as well, but even though they are a good agency with a good reputation. So I mean, as I've worked in multiple different agencies, I've seen both sides of this world where you're trying your best, but it's just no way to please the customer in certain circumstances. So this does crop up as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing these different issues that do crop up, and how you can try and protect against that.
Yeah, so well, let's go through what are the kind of, you've mentioned like a few that can go wrong. Are there other things, other mistakes that agencies make, or problems that arise simply because you're using an agency rather than using everyone within your own organisation?
Sure. So with some agencies, they're keen for the work. They're very eager to take on work, and they'll end up just agreeing to whatever the client comes out with. And obviously that can be very bad for both sides in that circumstances. I know India's got a bit of a reputation for just being a yes man, saying yes to everything that gets asked for, and then they'll worry about it later. And then, 3 months, 6 months later, things aren't being delivered and it's too late because the tough conversations weren't had earlier on inside the conversation, inside the process there. Other mistakes that some agencies have is they're not completely transparent about what's going on. So let's say you've chosen a team for staff augmentation and you know that 1 or 2 members are leaving, not feeding that information back to the client immediately, saying, okay, we've got a problem here. 2 of the guys that you really like are doing really well for you. They're actually moving, they're starting their own business or whatever it might be. Not feeding that information back straight away and say, look, we don't have a solution yet, but we've got a couple of hires coming in the pipeline or something like that. Just something to reassure them, saying that, yes, something bad's happening, but we are a good partner. We know how to help you. We've got this plan in place to make sure there's a handover period, make sure someone else can come in and keep your roadmap on track and to be able to move forward. That's another prime one that I've seen in the past of where mistakes can be made. Another one which you hear quite a lot even currently now, because I talk to lots of different companies, of course, that are using existing agencies at the moment, and they say, like, I have no view of the people that are actually working for me. All I do is talk to the project manager. So therefore the entire development team behind them is sort of hidden. It's a black box. They talk to the project manager, they give them the requirements, and there's no further conversation further down the chain with the actual people doing the work. So therefore communication issues can easily crop up in those circumstances.
And it can be very frustrating, can't it? Because if you're talking to someone and you're saying, I need this, and you're talking to a kind of middle person, then it just really, I'm not explaining this very well. I had a similar experience recently when trying to talk to a heating engineer and realising that the company I'd called only outsourced to heating engineers. And all they could say was, oh, I can't give you a time. The other team can't give you a time right now. And you're like, well, can I speak to them? Can I, so I totally get what you're saying.
Sure. I mean, essentially, this all falls down to normally the agency not supporting their own developers. So, if a client says, I need this done by Christmas, and the developers are going, that's never going to happen. What should an agency do in that circumstance? They can't just, one way they could go down and say, right, you developers, you have to get this done, work weekends, work nights, all that stuff, just to make the client happy. Or they could have that tough conversation with the client and say, look, from what your plan is, you're not going to be able to execute this by Christmas. Make them aware of that fact, and then you can start having the conversation of, is there anything you can cut out? What can you do? Can we bring additional resources into the project? Just if you're not taking care of your staff, then you're expecting them to push back on the client. A mid-level developer having to tell a client no is incredibly concerning for the developers. Okay, this is a big scary CEO that wants this delivered, I'm gonna have to say no. You need that support level there. So the agencies that don't have the support level to be able to have the communication back to the client when the developers are uncomfortable with something or the expectations are not going to be able to be met, to at least address that as soon as possible, so at least then that conversation can happen of how to actually try and fix this and reduce what damage could be done by not delivering a roadmap by whatever date that was set.
Yeah, and that's actually a challenge that I think could seem like an agency challenge, but really it's just a people management challenge, isn't it? It's when you get into that culture of, oh, it's someone else's fault, let's let them deal with it, or make it their problem to have to like you say, to have to say no, or put paid to plans that other people in other teams have made. Actually, it doesn't have to be an outsourcing problem at all. It's all about working together and seeing who's doing what bit and joining it all up.
Absolutely. I mean, as if we start going into where companies make mistakes, you're exactly right. Essentially, the mentality of just throwing it over the wall, forgetting about it, and expecting something to actually result in exactly what you want at that stage is so unlikely to actually realize in that situation, is there? So, essentially, success with any organization, with internal staff or outsourcing in the staff augmentation model, the success is based on how well you manage them. So it's no different by having people sitting right next to you or people sitting in another country. If you're not managing them appropriately, if you're not part of the stand-up routines, if you're not part of the communication channels that are going on in Slack and conversations about how things are getting built, you're just going on faith that things are actually going to be delivered. So you need to be part of that. Obviously, with like fixed price project work, that's a little bit different because there is a clear expectation from the start of what the output should be, because the work would have been put ahead of time in most cases. But still, that's still not a guaranteed gold check mark that's going to happen either, is it?
Well, it's not guaranteed that it will happen. Like you say, if you have a yes agency and you say, "Here's my fixed price for my fixed date," that date can come around and the software can not be there and the price can suddenly have gone up. Like, I think that's a common scenario that lots of people will have seen. And also, like you say, there's still challenges, even if you've got an agency that's not, I would say, criminal, like that first example you talked about, or negligent, but even an agency who's doing their best. There's a lot of nuance in a piece of software. So I think it's very easy to specify a fixed outcome that one party believes they've delivered and the other party doesn't. I think that's
fixed price projects are incredibly dangerous because if you're only thinking about, as you say, the outcome of that time, you haven't thought about what the growth plans are. How you structure your data is going to be incredibly important when you then start thinking about your analytics that you want to have out of it. So many times you see NoSQL based solutions coming through, and then suddenly they go, right, we now need these big reports and charts and all this stuff. It's like, well, you haven't got a relational database anymore, so we now have to think of this whole solution just to be able to pump the data into, like Elasticsearch or something, to be able to find the data that you're looking for your analytics. So fixed price projects is something that I normally try and stay away from. It's much better to have like a high level T&M approach, time materials approach to a plan, but also with that communication with customers, so they're part of every sprint demo day or anything like that, so they get to see what's getting built, but ideally actually part of the daily conversations about why things are getting built in a certain way and what the direction is. So therefore that could be considered as part of the build process. Otherwise you'll get to the end of the project and may have to rebuild a large chunk of it. Even though the company delivered exactly what you asked for, it's not going to be able to scale into the way that you want to be moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Communicate. I mean, listening through everything you've said, it's communication, isn't it? It's
exactly. I think that's easily forgotten when you're dealing with an agency. They just go, okay, it's their problem, they'll deal with it. And as you say, you can't forget about communication, whether they're sitting next to you or abroad. That communication needs to be there, and you need to always be available to answer questions. So therefore, things that do need clarifying can actually be clarified in a reasonable time frame.
So hello to everyone who's joined us on the call. If you'd like to ask a question, please do use the ask a question button at the bottom of the screen, or maybe even if you've got an outsourcing story and you want to chuck that into the conversation, then please do. I'll just check that now. I think it will pop up when someone asks a question. So should we talk a bit about, from the agency side, the challenges that agencies find when they're working with companies?
Sure. So, one I just mentioned there is still, the customer not understanding that they still need to manage the project, especially in staff augmentation. If they've got their own project managers, their own engineering managers or leads, that feedback loop needs to be there to make sure everyone's on the same page. But moving on to a few other things as well. It's very easy when you're outsourcing or nearshoring to forget that the developers that are working for you actually have their own career plans, their own objectives in life of what they want to achieve. It's very easy to say, oh, this is a professional that I've paid to do this job, and just forget that they've got career objectives and want to improve themselves too. So I do see some companies, it's happening much less regularly now, which is great because I think the education's more there. But the idea of just throwing the bad rubbish work at the agency, I just say, right, you deal with all the little bug stuff, not dealing with any of the interesting work, that'll stay inside as part of the internal team. It's very hard for a developer to still stay interested, just constantly doing BAU tasks day in, day out for a long period of time. It's very hard to retain people that are doing that type of work. So ideally, you want to try and mix it evenly across both teams, especially with staff augmentation. So therefore, everyone gets the experience of dealing with new feature development that you're working on, but also some of the more stability tasks that are going in place as well. It's as a team, and it also means that knowledge is shared. If you've got one team that's outsourced, that's purely doing the bug fixing, then the internal team's not going to have any idea about what type of bugs are actually coming into the product or why they're coming into the product. So therefore, the quality never gets improved. So therefore, you do want to try and have that mix in both ways. And another common issue that agencies normally see is, they expect the developers to be coding 100% of the time. This is a common issue for normally people that are traditionally inside the tech sector already. I go, they're supposed to do a full 8 hours of coding every day, just like you would do with your internal members of staff. They're not going to be coding for the entire day. They're going to be having meetings. They're going to be reviewing PRs. They're going to have conversations about their tickets. They're going to be, supporting other people inside the team. And I think that's very easily forgotten as well when it's outsourced as well, because they're not sitting next to you. They're still trying to provide value. Obviously, you expect output from the team. I'm not saying that you don't have commitment allocated to the team for what they're delivering inside the sprint and making sure you can measure the value that's coming out of the team. But expecting them to do a full 8 hours every single day of just pure head down coding is a bit naive with the other activities that are required from actually building a product or supporting a product in a traditional development environment. So that's another issue I see crop up.
Yeah, and that's a kind of misconception of what even is coding. And I think as soon as you've kind of done it as your job and it's a creative endeavor, and like a lot of creative endeavors, your brain needs downtime to work optimally in terms of planning things out. It's not a handle turning exercise. And I think one of the things that can happen is people say you get the agency you deserve. Not people have had challenges with agency, like, I don't mean that in a bad way, but like if you treat coders like handle turners, you will get handle turning coders, and you will not get the best code out of that process at all, because like you just said earlier, there are so many complexities to a good piece of software and so many different facets that need to be delivered. You need people who are thinking creatively around the whole area, not just, I've got 8 hours of coding. It's almost like measuring coders on like lines of code, isn't it? How many, this code has written 1,000 lines of code and this one's only written 100. Well, if it's the right 100.
Exactly. If it's the right 4 lines of code even,
right,
that's enough for a day's worth of work, just because of the value that it brings to the problem that's at hand.
Indeed, and it's better than 1,000 lines of code that does the same thing.
Sure. And as you mentioned there, you get the agency that you deserve. I've noticed more and more as my career's progressed in the agency world, we are more selective with the clients that we pick. There are certain clients that we'll actually pull out from because we understand that we're not the right fit for them. And we also understand a lot of red flags around the client going, do you know what, there's so many warning marks here. They're not listening to our advice. They're not willing to have conversations about certain things that need to be had to make sure that this team can be successful. So therefore, we'll pull ourselves out of opportunities purely because we understand that if we do kick off the project, there's going to be so much mess there. The client's not going to be happy because they're unwilling to consider, the way that we need to work or the way we believe needs to work for this type of project. So therefore, that's the best thing for the agency. But as you say, you get the agency that you deserve, because agencies can be picky, especially in this market where there's so much demand for internal hires and everyone's really struggling to hire anyone internally. Outsourcing is really exploding, I think, because of that capability, because of that requirement there.
So I'm going to take a question from the audience, because I think it's always good to answer questions. If you have questions, if we're covering everything, all of the topics that you came here to hear about, then brilliant. If we're not, then ask us questions so that we can tailor what we're talking about to what you want to know. So question from Stephen: is it a good idea to delegate a tech lead from the agency for code quality control? Great question.
So yes, in most cases, I would say. Obviously, if you're a very small team and you've only got a couple of members, you've got a large internal team and only a small few members from the agency, then the code quality decision in making these is going to be made internally, because you've got most of your experienced staff at that higher level. But if you do have a more of a larger, more people, maybe a whole team potentially. Absolutely, these people are experts. These people are very experienced in code quality in multiple different companies. They've seen the different ways of having coding disciplines and requirements around the PRs and pieces around there. So If it's a large enough team, absolutely, I think it makes sense to have that. Obviously, the first week or two, you want to have someone else doing the PRs as well to make sure that the code quality standards that you expect inside your organization are understood by the technical lead that's going to be taken over from the outsourcing agency, just so that standard is in place and clearly understood. Most companies don't have clear enough documentation about what their coding standard expectations are, and it's more of an unspoken a rule of what they expect. So therefore, there needs to be a bit of time for them to get up to speed with how this works. But after that, absolutely, if you do have a team, a team of 6 or 7 or much more, there's no reason not to have the lead there. Though, coming on to the lead piece, that's another interesting conversation as well. So, as we talk about what the challenges with agencies, with companies, some customers do come along and say, right, I want 10 lead developers. I don't want seniors. I don't want mids. I want all leads. I've actually had a case of saying I want 10 leads. I want them all to have PhDs, and I want them all to be public speakers. So there's 2 things to be very clear about this. Firstly, that's the wrong thing for a company.
What are they doing? Starting a consultancy? I mean...
It was a concern, wasn't it? It's like, what do you expect from that? That isn't the right team to deliver anything, is it? The idea of too many chefs in the kitchen is exactly that. You've got too many leads that will be just fighting each other about different approaches. So you'd be wasting money and not providing the value. But from the agency standpoint, they don't want to give up 10 of their lead developers onto one project. They want one lead associated across individual projects separately, mainly because leads are hard to find. Even in the UK market, it's very difficult to get experienced people that can communicate very well, does understand the business side a little bit as well, so therefore they can have deeper conversations with the product owners, and allocating more than one lead into one team is very challenging for an organization to want to deal with. Obviously, if you've got 30 people from the agency, then 3, 4, 5 maybe leads coming into there, absolutely fine. But coming along saying, okay, I want just 2 people, 1 lead and 1 junior. The lead's going to be training the junior. That's not interesting, because they know that 1 lead can help enable a team of 6 or 7 people, or maybe even 2 or 3 teams. They're very experienced. So therefore, they're not going to want to just throw leads at opportunities that are not going to be big enough, purely because the bigger opportunities are the ones that need the most support, the ones that have the most complexity, the ones that have so many moving parts with different companies. That's where you really need the lead experience.
And it's also back to the point you made earlier about software developers are people and individuals with their own career plans and expectations and rewards, different reward profiles from work, if you see what I mean. Like, different people enjoy different things and thrive in different environments, and actually giving someone work that isn't challenging enough is a big issue. That's not a good result for anyone in all kinds of ways, and particularly not for the people involved. And it reminded me of what you said earlier, actually, about I think sometimes agencies, people try and commoditize it a bit. So I think that people used to have an approach to employees that was quite commodity based. I'll have 3 of those and 2 of those, and boom, they'll do what we tell them to. And actually, you just don't manage people in that way, and that doesn't change just because they're someone else's people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, developers are not just cogs in the machine. You can't just add more cogs and have more stuff just always come out. You need to understand the team dynamics. You need to make sure you're picking the right type of skill sets for the team, for the requirements that need to be done. It's not just a case of you can easily replace someone with someone else in that type of manner. So yeah, absolutely. That is, we do get a few rare cases of this with the lead piece. Hopefully that's answered their question there about whether a lead should be in place. So I would say yes, if it's a big enough size team.
Yes, we got this. So it's all so tied into everything else. The other thing that it reminded me of was, again, something you said earlier, Glyn. Why not discuss this with the agency? So I think that it's you're kind of already have got half of the solution by saying we need to be worrying about code quality, not just, someone else will, we've bought some code, so someone else will worry about that, and then how are we going to deal with this? But actually, I'd recommend discussing with your agency how they would best set it up, and be open to other solutions as well. So next question. Another great question. So how do you handle an agile methodology clash? So if an agency is more waterfall, but the client is more agile in terms of the requirement and the deliveries, and the agency don't want the client to get involved too much in their internal management. Now, there is a whole load of depth in this question.
Okay, so what I normally see it's the other way around. It's the client that wants to be more waterfall, and it's the agency that wants to be more agile. That's what I come across more. But you're absolutely right. There's the challenge piece there. So that conversation needs to be had of what the expectations of working are going to be, how it's actually going to take place. And if, the agency says, okay, we're going to plan everything up front, we're going to, plan the entire project, deliver like this, in this type of approach, and we're not going to be accepting, doing sprint reviews, we're not going to be having constant communication with the customer, then you understand that doesn't fit the agile methodology of the way of making sure that you're moving quickly, you're iterating, and you're delivering value on a regular basis. I think that's quite easily detected in early conversations with the agency that you're talking with. But for me, normally it is the other way around, where the client goes, okay, well, I've only got X amount of money for this project. I need to have this project by Christmas or something like that. I need to be able to deliver by this period. That's normally where I see more challenges crop up. So therefore you have conversations, say, look, for what you're asking for, firstly, the timeline's unrealistic. You're not going to be able to hit that. Even if we double or triple the team size, it's not possible to deliver the same amount of value, or it potentially is, but you're wasting so much money because there's so much crossover with multiple teams. It's not going to be as cost efficient for you, but then the client can decide whether that's going to be valuable or not. And yes, with the whole agile approach, every agency I've worked with in the last 6 years has always been following the agile methodology. They want to have that in place. They don't want to commit to fixed price projects or like a go for a waterfall style because of the hassle of having to deal with change control. Constantly they understand, even if they agree to something that's a bit more project based, it'll then first couple of sprints in, right, we've changed our mind, this is now a priority, or now this is what we're going to be doing. And things change just so quickly. It's just like there's no point even pretending that this is the case. It's like you've got a team, you manage a team how you want, or we'll have support with you from project managers or from engagement managers on our side, or even like leadership. We have leadership as a service offering too, of how you want to manage it. And obviously you'll have reporting on a regular basis of what people have been working on, what's been delivered in that time throughout the sprint. So therefore you do have transparency of progress against what has been asked for and how we're doing, and obviously with the changes that have been put in place there. But you're absolutely, I think it's quite easy to spot the agency that you can work with and you can't from early conversations by asking the right questions about how you work and what your expectations are and whether they push back against that. So normally it is the other way around, where they want to do waterfall and we're pushing back against them, going, it's not the right approach. You haven't got a clear definition of everything that you want here already. We know that it's going to get much worse than that. So we could go project based, but it's T&M. So therefore we know that you're going to come along with changes very quickly inside this project. So you're still getting the same value as you would do for hiring an internal team, just taking away that theatre of this is a waterfall approach. It's not really. We've got a long-term plan, but in all fairness, that's going to change as we move forward. And ideally, you want that quick iteration so you can actually see value, so you can actually get something out there, get the MVPs done, start measuring success, and actually tweaking and iterating on that success.
Because it's also a form of communication, isn't it? You're not delivering something for a prototype for clients to see every 2 weeks to prove you're doing the work. You're doing it to get feedback on, have we built the right thing?
Absolutely.
We've interpreted your the necessarily not exact instructions this way, and this is the output. Is this right? Are we going on the right track? And you want to keep, if you're an agency where your objective is to deliver great outcomes for the client, which it is for all good agencies, but perhaps not the one you mentioned at the start, which I'm still horrified about, then you want to get this feedback that you're going in the right direction. You don't want to get to the end of 6 months and find you've been doing the wrong thing. That's a nightmare outcome.
But that's client education again, though. This is one of the things I do most when I get brought into pre-sales calls, is client education, where they go, okay, I don't want to go live until this is perfect. And it's like, well, how do you know what's perfect? How, yes, you've got this vision, but if you're not actually got anyone using the product and collecting feedback, you don't know that's perfect. But a few people that aren't heavily in the tech industry, new to it, they've got some money, they know what they want to build, but are willing to try and go down that agile approach. It's quite a big jump for people that aren't in this industry. It's a much harder conversation to get to convince them that this is the better way to go, where you've got something to show within the first month. It may be much smaller, but at least then you've got you're proving the value of the model that you're trying to build, rather than waiting 6 months, going live with it, sitting around twiddling your thumbs for 3 months to see if anyone's actually going to use the product, and then realizing what your mistakes were.
Yeah, well, we may be in a situation here. So this is another question from Stephen. It may be the case, Stephen, that you deserve a better agency. Reading your question. The other phrase that really jumps out to me from your question is the agency don't want the client to get involved too much in their internal management. And for me, having managed software projects, that kind of fills me with alarm. Like the idea of someone saying, don't mind me, I'm doing some stuff over here, don't come and look, it's all fine. It makes me want to go and look more, right? So obviously on the flip side, no one wants to be micromanaged and be like, well, did you do that exact thing? So I think that this is a question of process, and like Glyn said, agreeing the process. And also I think you're absolutely within your rights as a client to go back to the agency and say, look, this isn't working for us. This is what would work for us. And actually maybe try and have a conversation around, can the agency that you, as the client, you are paying agencies a large amount of money to deliver top quality software for you. And if your agency isn't delivering what you need, both in terms of the communication and processes as well as the software, you need to go back and tell them that. And I would strongly recommend changing agent. I know it's a big challenge to change agency, but if you're not getting what you need and they're making it clear they can't deliver that, I would change sooner rather than later. I would, you deserve a better agency.
Yeah, I do agree. Essentially, I have talked to a few customers in the last 6 months where they're changing agency for exactly this reason. And as I mentioned at the start, where you only talk to the PM, you don't see any of the background black box team. And, as you say, you don't get to see what happens behind the scenes. And in these cases, it's normally because they're switching people around all the time. They've got a load of juniors on the bench they want to bring up to speed. And so therefore they get them to work on the project. The one senior programmer that you may have talked to near the beginning of the project, he's either left or working on a different project. So they've got other people delivering this. That is a very waterfall type approach, which is something that you can't get out of when you're in that sort of structure. It's a case of, do you want to work with an agency with that approach? It probably works well for them, for most of their clients, but if it doesn't work for you, then that's absolutely fine. You have the conversation, you make it clear that it's not working for you, and they either decide to address that and adapt the way they need to work to make you happy, or if they say they can't, then yes, you need to find a different agency that will make you happy in the way they're working and the transparency that you want from the process.
Yeah, and as Glyn says, you're coming from the right perspective, or the most commonly right perspective, and the top agencies want to work in the way that you're describing. So, like Glyn says, often agencies have the problem the other way around. So, get out there and find some agencies. Absolutely. Okay, next question from Maxim. Once the agency is gone, how does one ensure ownership? So we've hinted at this. You kind of mentioned this briefly in the tech lead question, but for the whole project, how do you ensure ownership and handover? So
this is where you're thinking project based. If you don't have an internal tech team, you're getting a team to go out, build this product for you, and you're not really part of the process. So therefore, they'll just deliver in a waterfall model your product, and then they disappear off, and you've got a load of code. You don't understand why decisions were made in a certain way. You don't understand why the architecture is built like this, and it's difficult to get up to speed quickly on that type of product if you're not part of the decision making or the conversation there. So as we mentioned before, staff augmentation is always what I'd recommend for customers. If you do have an internal team, have at least a couple members of the internal team part of the process that you're using with the outsourcing agency, so therefore the knowledge of the product is still inside your internal team. I would never recommend an organization go purely outsource the entire product build. Only in extreme circumstances where it really is waterfall. But if it's not and you're planning to own this product, absolutely, the staff augmentation model works so much better. And people understand why decisions are made. Decisions are made every single day by every developer of what to build, and if there's no conversation that you're privy to, you don't get to see that conversation in the sprint planning discussions, in the retrospectives of what's going wrong, what's going right. Then you just got an awful lot of catching up to do without any support, without anyone to go and ask. The other approach some companies come out with is say, oh, we'll give you lots of documentation. It's difficult to write really good documentation, especially as you're building the product, because the product's constantly adapting and changing. And how much documentation do you really want? Do you want just an architecture diagram so you know where things sit? Or do you want individual code decisions to be documented and monitored and all that stuff as well? Ideally you want access to the ticketing system, so therefore you'd hope some of these conversations happen with inside the ticket so you can actually view that and actually catch up on certain things. But still, any decent sized project, it's going to be impossible to really search and find what you're actually looking for when a problem does crop up. So my personal opinion is, if there's an expectation where you're owning this afterwards, someone, at least one person on your side, needs to be heavily involved on a regular basis with the development team, just so that does sit inside your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like managing information is a whole other conversation itself, which is super interesting. But essentially, if you're looking at this kind of detailed information, it's not possible to summarize it into like a one page of this is what you need to know about you need to have been involved in it, and you need to see things as they happen. All right, brilliant. Shall we move on?
Sure.
I've got two more questions. So this one, again, I am a little bit horrified just by reading this question. So, I'm aware of outsourced companies using psychological tactics, demanding upfront payment to complete delivery, stating they need to feed their families. Unfortunately, the business made the complete payment upfront, which didn't end up well in the long run. How can novice business managers better prepare themselves for the unexpected? Wow.
Yes. I mean, to me, it sounds like the conversations at the start of what the payment terms weren't made with you before you decided to agree to go ahead with the company. So with staff augmentation, it's very easy. You pay on a regular basis for this team, and you know what the payment terms are. There's no question about it. You know that you're paying this much money to deliver the project.
And you'd pay in arrears, right? You'd pay, people would do some work, and then you would pay them for the work, like you would with any contractor, right?
Exactly.
Or employees. They do some work and you pay them after they've done the work.
Exactly. And there may be probably a deposit up front with certain organisations, well, probably with most organisations now, because every company's plan is to delay their payments out as long as possible but get their payments in as soon as possible. But that's based on payment terms, so that can be that should be really clear before you kick off the project. It should be really clear what it stands. Well, it sounds like here this is more of a waterfall approach again, where they've decided this is a fixed price project. You pay 25% up front. We'll then do X number of work to hit this milestone, when you then pay another 25%, and then continue down that until you reach the full amount. And it sounds to me in that example that you're given there that either the conversation wasn't had, or they need the next milestone payment made before they've delivered that milestone. And obviously giving I don't like the word psychological tactics, but giving that reason that they need to feed their families. Well, the question is, why was this not understood or discussed beforehand, that you need to pay up front for this type of project? Obviously, with all developers, they need to be paid. Just like an internal member of staff, if you didn't pay them at the end of the month, they wouldn't be happy. So just like an outsourcing agency, if you're missing the payment terms that are in place, they won't be happy, so therefore would demand that you pay, otherwise they'll stop work. I think that's quite reasonable, as long as you're clear that this is the situation you're in. It's this payment terms, you have this number of days to pay. If you don't, then we're going to have conversation with you, go, guys, need to catch up on this. Normally there's some buffer room, but if you're constantly a bad payer, then sometimes the client needs a kick. But it was all agreed in contracts up front, so therefore there should be no surprises. So in your case here, it sounds like there was a surprise payment asked to be made before everything was delivered. And the warning signs are there. Is why are they asking for money ahead of time when this wasn't discussed earlier in the process of your development?
Well, and also a professional business, like ours, right? You manage your own cash flow. You're able to make sure that you can pay your developers that you employ as an agency on regular business payment terms. I think if an agency, for me again, it's a red flag. If someone came to me and said, my developers can't afford to eat unless you pay me up front, for me, it's an immediate red flag. I don't want to work with a company that can't manage their cash flow, because they could go bust halfway through the project. There's a lot of other bad consequences that could happen, if they're not able to do basic business management. In terms of how novice business managers can better prepare themselves, I do think that having this element of choice. So kind of Glyn mentioned, payment terms should be part of the discussion. And if you have several agencies and they all explain their payment terms and their models for doing it, and you have a range of choices, then you'll better understand what the options are, and perhaps not feel stuck with one agency who wants to work in a particular way, or also perhaps know how to negotiate with the agency and say, well, hold on, this agency over here, they bill us in arrears and we pay them every month. Can we pay you on those terms?
Sure. I mean, with us, we have those conversations quite a lot where customers try to state what the payment terms are, and obviously have an extended payment terms. We'd only ever agree to it if you're a big corporation, though, just because of the risk on our side from a business perspective. If they want longer payment terms, you'd have to be like a public listed company or something like that, where we know that the money is going to be paid. Where with obviously the smaller 2 people type companies, that's such a big business risk where they could just close the company down, you never see the money. Therefore, you have to be much more protective and make sure that you are going to get paid, because as you say, developers still need paying as well. Our cash flow is fine, but if too many customers do late payments or negate to pay us at all, then we are getting ourselves into trouble. So it's important that agencies do need to protect themselves. But as you say, the conversations about payment terms could be had, but for the good agencies, I like to think I'm with a good agency, would only make exceptions in cases that can be justified. So if there are longer payment terms, either a bigger deposit or you're a larger organization, just to know that the protection is still there for our organisation to make sure we can still make regular payments to our staff, just like you would do with internal people.
Yeah, exactly. And it's another red flag for me if someone just says, oh yes, you can pay on like 200-day payment terms. Again, it's a risk, because organisations do go bust, and something you need as well as like excellent code delivery is a business that's running the business well, because you want this to be a long-term relationship, or at least until you've had everything delivered that you need delivered. Okay, brilliant. So next question. So this, I think, is related to the last question. I wonder also if agreed graded milestone payments and get-out clauses need to be included upfront in contracts agreements with outsource agencies to minimise risk, which is exactly what you just said, Glyn, right?
Yes. I think it touches on a few other things as well, though. So when we talk about graded, that's interesting. So milestone is easy. So milestone payments, that can be clearly documented in your contracts, no problem there. Graded can be superficially determined. That's one of the problems. Does it deliver against expected output? Yes, but the code's terrible. It's very hard for you to be confident of the graded piece. This is why you want to be part of the conversation of the daily work. So therefore, at a very early stage, you can identify if code quality standards are not being met, if testing's not being put in place, or whatever the expectations were, so that it can be identified. And the agency has the opportunity to correct any expectations that aren't being met, of course. Obviously, if you do a milestone, you leave it, 3 months is the first milestone, you get it, and then go, okay, right, I'm pulling out because this expectation hasn't been met, even though it wasn't understood or clearly documented. That feels a bit unfair. So therefore, you want to be part of it. But yeah, absolutely, payment should be made if there is a milestone payment system in place. Payment should only be made against the milestone delivery. That'll be the reason for the contract. Get out clauses, that's an interesting one. So like with staff augmentation, like what we do is we have a 30-day ramp down notice. So you're not tied in for 1 year, 2 years. Like some organizations I talk to say, yeah, we're coming to the end of our 3-year contract for staff augmentation. 3 years, that's an awful lot of commitment. With our agency, it's 30 days. At any point in the contract, you can say, I want to ramp down 1, 2, or everybody. So therefore, you've always got full control to be able to stop the project or stop the developers in that sense. With project-based work, it's a bit different because you want to have something complete to make sure that you at least have something to show for the work that's been paid. So therefore, yes, I would agree that inside the milestone piece, if milestones not being met, you don't get paid. And maybe, yes, you do put in a get-out clause where at that stage you do have that conversation about whether you want to continue or not. I could see that as a fair arrangement. But obviously, this is upfront conversations you need to have before you kick off the project. Trying to put it in halfway through, the agency can just say no, and what are you going to do about it? You've got no recourse.
Exactly, which is what the whole point about putting it in the contract and agreeing it. I mean, putting it in a contract is one thing, but most organisations, you want to avoid going to court over a contract, right? That's not a great way to end or even continue a relationship. But having the upfront agreement, so actually both parties are in the same place and delivering to the same standards and the same expectations, is super, super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're talking about, from the same question, the question before, but from the same person, how can novice business managers better prepare themselves for this? Essentially, it's the conversations. Unfortunately, it's a bit of experience to know what to ask for, but hopefully this talk is going to help with that, of what to ask for, to understand what the payment terms are, what's the delivery expectations, how they work, what's your escalation point. That's one thing we haven't touched on yet. Essentially, what support do they offer outside of the direct team that is working on it? Yes, you might have a project manager in place, but if you've got concerns, maybe one of the developers isn't performing in the way that you want to do, what's your escalation point? And you should have a clear escalation point. So, we have engagement managers on our side. They can reach out to me as well. So most of our customers, understand that I'm here as well. So the engagement manager is the first point, but if they're unavailable, it comes through to me. And then I'm able to have that conversation, even at the more technical level of going, I'm not happy. This isn't working. This isn't being developed fast enough, or whatever the reason might be. I go, okay, great. I get the feedback from the client. I then talk to the developers, go, right, what's your feedback? This is what they're telling me. They can then tell me, say, okay, the tickets are bad, then they're unclear of what they want, or yes, we're struggling because this is more complex than expected. I can then have a conversation with the customer and go, right, this is the feedback we've got, this is why this is happening, this is what we can do to try and address this and help you. As long as you've got an escalation point and an understanding of what the support level is outside of the standard team that's in place, somewhere to go to if they're not delivering. I can't understand any person not wanting that. That's I would say that's a vital thing when choosing an agency, of what the communication is outside of the team with someone that can support you when things are not going the right way.
Yeah, brilliant. And maybe make contact with that person up front, because actually their ability to do something about it, if you have a challenge, is part of the service that you're buying and part of what you want to vet the agency on, right?
Yeah. I mean, in our case, our engagement managers, they're also the salespeople as well. So they're the first point of contact for pre-sales activities. So they've already got a relationship with the customer, but they're also your first contact when things aren't happening with the development team in the way that you want as well. And also regular feedback sessions as well, especially with the staff augmentation model. With us, when we first kick off a project with a team, let's say 4 or 5, for the first few weeks, every week there'll be a feedback session with the client to go, right, how's the team going, any concerns? We'll do the same thing with the developers. Any concerns, they'll be able to say, okay, yeah, there's no testing environment available to us that there should be. You can have that communication, understand what's going on, and both sides can correct anything that's not working. And then after a few weeks, when things are stabilized, you knock it down to every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, and then just once a month. I would expect a regular feedback loop to be put in place with any offshoring team that you are working with, just so both sides can give their honest opinions of what's happening outside of standard retrospective, just what's happening with the team, how they're performing. And it's unfair to say to an agency you're doing a bad job if there's no communication that they're doing a bad job. You need to be able to feed this back when you are unhappy with anything that's not happening, just so they can correct. If they don't correct it, then yes, it's an agency doing a bad job. But if they don't know that there's an expectation there that they're unaware of, you can't blame them for not reading your mind and being able to account for that. So therefore, I would say, even if the agency you're working with is not doing that, ask for it. Say, okay, can we do regular feedback sessions every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks? You tell me what the team's thinking, I'll tell you what I'm thinking, and at least things can improve if things are not going the right way. Even if things are going perfectly, it's good to still keep that communication in place for when little things change.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. Whenever I talk about complex software stuff, I always want to be like, there's not a one-word answer. If you're looking for a one-word answer, you can't. It's all nuanced and complex. But I feel like for this topic, we have got our one-word answer. It is communication. To avoid failure, communicate. All right, brilliant. We've got 9 minutes left, so if anyone's got a question, you'll have to jump in super, super quickly. Otherwise, perhaps should we finish with the characteristics of the best companies that use agencies? Or the best, all the things the best agencies do, which is better. Let's have some positives at the end.
Yeah, well, I think we've touched on a lot of these already. So, essentially, the companies that are best for agencies, like for our agency, the companies we like most are the ones that treat our team like their team. Essentially, they're the same team. Essentially, yeah, they've got an extra escalation point if something's not happening with them, but they're like their own members. They're part of the sprint planning, they're part of the retrospectives, they're part of the stand-ups, they're part of the Slack communities. Everyone feels comfortable talking to each other, and they're working as a cohesive unit. That is the best organization that we can work with, because that delivers the best results. So therefore, happier client, we're happy too. And I've seen different companies do this in different ways. Some companies even pay out bonuses. So when they pay out their internal bonuses, they actually ring us up and say, yeah, we're paying our internal team bonuses. We want to give that too. Obviously, that's not an expectation. I'm not saying anyone that works with us at the moment has to pay bonuses. But, the odd client does even do that, which is amazing. It's really great to see, because they do really consider them like their own team members, which is fantastic. And some go, arranging time for team building activities. So therefore, if they are doing an online quiz show or anything like that, the offshore team is included in that. They're part of this. So it can be very positive if you do treat it in that way. And the communication piece, as long as we do get a few clients that don't want to be part of the feedback loops, we say, okay, look, the team's been with you for a few weeks now. Can we please just have a conversation to see how it's going? Oh, I'm too busy. Don't have time to do that. It's like, well, you can't turn around to me next week then and say that the guys are bad. We want the feedback. We want to see what your small little niggles of things not happening are for you, so we can micro adjust to make sure it's meeting. But if we're not getting feedback in either direction, we can't help you make this a success. So, that's so vital. And, some clients even go too far as actually want to understand the developers' career plans themselves. They go, well, actually, we've got a lot of machine learning work coming up. The guy's doing a great job in, some of the back-end programming. He wants to do machine learning. We're happy to put him into the team as well, of the machine learning team, so he gets exposed to that and can start doing that work. I mean, like I say, these are the cream of the crop, things that you can get. There's not an expectation that you have to do this, but these are examples where I believe that the company understands the relationship with the agency as a true partner that works in the best type of way. So, it does make me smile when I see these things happen. It's like, yes, they get it. They understand how to make this work and make this success. It's like their own team.
Yeah, and it is in your own interests, because being able to interact with agencies in this way will help you find the best agencies to work with, or maybe even help shape an agency to do a better job for you and to get the best work out of an agency, which at the end of the day is comprised of the people who work for it. If you're doing your best for them, then they will do their best for you. It's just the same as with an internal team.
Sure. I see Maxim's very skeptical about using agencies, even more so after today. I think that's probably because of the bad stories and experiences that people have. Like I say, there's a lot of very good agencies out there. There are some bad ones, and the bad ones are always the ones you remember, which is why, these are the first stories that you come out with. But like you say, as long as you've got the clear transparency, the communication in place, and you understand, both sides understand what the expectations are, it can work really, really well. And in today's market, more and more companies are starting to use nearshoring purely because they can't hire internally. There's just so much demand. It's so difficult. So therefore, a staff augmentation model seems to be the right approach to be able to still expand your team at, obviously the cost is a little bit lower when it comes to working with agencies because they're in other countries, but don't choose them purely because of the cost, please. The cost is not a good determining factor for using outsourcing. You want to make sure that it's an agency that can deliver high quality work instead of, oh, they're cheaper. It's not the same type, it can't always be the same type of work. So it's very important that you do understand that difference between price and quality of the work being delivered. So that's what you should be assessing for. That's what you should be asking for in interviews when you're actually interviewing developers, making sure the technical ability is there. They can work in the way that you want them to work, in an agile fashion if that's the way you want to work. Make sure they're available and pieces around that.
Absolutely. And that brings me on, or reach out to us for a chat. So one thing I was going to do at the end is leave Glyn's contact details, so I'll do that now. Do reach out to Glyn or reach out to me at Software, and we can tell you how we do things and what we do to deal with challenges, because it's not a win for an agency. It's not a win for a good agency. You don't stay in business for 20 odd years by delivering bad projects and by having clients who are unhappy. It's just simply not sustainable. So good agencies want to do better, and they want to take on feedback, and they want to deliver software that you're happy with, and teams who are thriving and doing well, and everyone's happy. Win-win, that's what we're all about.
Absolutely. It's the partnership piece. You have to work together. Like you say, you can't just throw things over the wall and expect it to come back exactly how you want. As long as you consider them as a partner, not just as an external source, that mentality seems to be the difference between when relationships work with these types of projects or not.
And I haven't got my contact details in a nice little format like that, but I'm Zoe Cunningham, Zoe F Cunningham everywhere, so I'm sure you can find me. Well, thank you so much, Glyn. I think if there are no more last minute questions, that's a really great place to draw it to a close. It's been a great conversation. It's a conversation we are going to keep having because, like you say, there's so much demand at the moment for engineers. Then we kind of want to. The industry is going to keep going, and we're going to keep using more mixed models, more new ways of delivering. So there's a message here from Fiona. Ryan Singer, the author of Shape Up, is going to be speaking next Friday at the Meet the Author event. Tickets are free and they will become bookable over the next few days. So please do join us there at the next CTO Craft event. Thank you so much for the positive feedback. Thank you, Glyn, and see you all soon.
Thank you, Zoe. Have a great Christmas, everyone.
Bye.